is Michèle at Dasami Bookworm Podcast, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome Michael Bland here today, award-winning author from Denver, Colorado. So we've gone a little bit further in order to get an interview. Welcome to Dasami.
Michèle, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited about our conversation because it's going to touch on quite a few important points for our authors and for other writers who have just begun the journey, working on it, might be a little bit intimidated. You have a lot of experience and excellent advice. So I think the best place to start is the inspiration for your most recent project, your trilogy. And please say the names.
Absolutely. So the trilogy is The Price of Trilogy. Starts with The Price of Safety, which came out in 2020, and the sequel, The Price of Rebellion, came out last year. Both have won a number of awards. The first one's won 3. The second is actually up to 7 awards now. Just won 2 more last week from the International Book Awards. Um, and the inspiration of it was on a really strange urge to be naked one day. I was living in Chicago and was on the L one day, coming home from work, and I noticed every single person in the car had their noses in their phones. Not that I'm not, guilty of doing that occasionally myself, but I just had this strange urge. I'm like, I could just, take off all my clothes and no one would have any idea. But then I noticed that in the roof of the cab, there are 3 cameras, which means anyone could be watching. And then that led me to believe, well, how could I stop them? Not that I wanted to get naked, just so you know, but definitely there was that thought of, well, how can I have no control over that. And then how could I stop them from watching? And then it from there went that it's not just in the car, it's at the station, it's you go out on the street, it's cameras are everywhere. And we've become more accepting of having these cameras as well as on our phones, which I love my smartphone like many people do, but it can track you, it's listening, it's doing all of these things, and we've accepted it as a society. And it's only going to continue. It's only going to continue to be more prevalent, be more pervasive, and more, get into deeper into all of our lives. And so then the thought from there was, how would I protect someone that I care about, someone that might be in trouble with this increasing level of surveillance and people watching and tracking. And so that was the inspiration for the book. And it's where it's set 25 years in the future. And I set it 25 years in the future because think about how far we've come just in the last 25 years, where we're almost at the page of, we're using pagers and where the internet was barely much of anything and people had computer rooms, right? To now where you can even just talk at your phone and it gives you answers and it tracks you, does all these things, and where we're going to be 25 years from now. And so the story is in this world 25 years from now, the main character, Dray Quintero, his 19-year-old daughter commits a crime. And in this world, the surveillance has gotten so prevalent and so integrated in all of our lives that no crime goes unsolved anymore. So when she commits this crime, he has to cover it up to save her life. And that starts down this rabbit hole where he discovers the technology that he helped create is being used in a way he never had imagined, was to manipulate and control people in a way that he had not planned, that he had not intended to happen. And so that's where he is having to fight, trying to determine how to save his family in this kind of a world. And then in the second book, he has now become part of the struggle to try to stop the government that has people within the government that has used this technology in a way that was never planned. And he is risking everything, his family, himself, for this. And then he thinks he finds a way to actually win. And then he is told some information that he then has to make a really difficult choice. Does he continue to fight to free everyone, or does he chase a desperate hope that is meaningful just for himself?
Michael, the underlying message that you have there is so reflective on a major part of history. For example, it always comes back to World War II with the bomb. The scientists that worked on and creating that technology did not expect it to be used in a nuclear bomb. And I think that's, and there's other instances which I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are other instances where scientists and engineers have created something quite beautiful, and then it's been used in a completely different manner and not always to the benefit of humankind. Did that, once you had written the stories, was that part of it for you, or did you think about that?
Absolutely. Yes. That to me is a really big underlying theme with it. Technology it's a tool. It's like anything else. And just like a hammer can be used to help build a house or destroy a house, it's a tool. Technology is, but it's at a grander scale, correct? And it can be used in number of ways. I mean, a hammer is a very simple analogy. Technology is much more complex and it can be much more insidious. It can be much more operating in ways that we as a society and as individuals don't know and haven't contemplated yet. And so that was a really big driving force behind it, is not to say technology is bad, not to say the government's bad, not to say individuals are bad, but things and people can be used in ways, and let's be honest, a lot of people are in their own self-interest. And if you can find a technology and use it in a way that no one expects that you benefit, more than likely you're going to do that. And we're also seeing it right now in real time in terms of AI. Not to go down that road, but that's something that could be great, that could be fantastic, but it's also there are concerns for writers having stories stolen and used in manipulative ways. The music industry, I read that they're threatening lawsuits with AI firms about using music, but it's even more than that, because how can AI be used to manipulate? There are one of the things that in the third book, that it's, by the way, the third book is done, I'm just editing it. But in the third book, it talks about how companies have used for years, developed ways to manipulate people to primarily buy their product. And it's a way to, how do you lay out in a store to steer people towards the most expensive items without them consciously realizing it. It's all about, I'm blanking on the words right now, but
Apple.
very dangerous.
I love Apple, but I have to say, and once I went down the Apple route, it started with a phone, computer, then the
Mhm.
phone, and then the watch, and then the iPad. And now I won't have anything else other than an Apple. And my friends and I, we have friendly little arguments about it because, they're Androids. But that's a perfect example of it. Once and I know it costs more money, but for me, it's about the value. And I think that's the cost to it. What will it cost ultimately? Is it going to be an emotional cost, a life cost, or something as simple as, a monetary exchange? The underlying story about it's very important. How did your main character, Dray, how did he how was he created and his moral values and the ethical values? I really like the part where he wants to protect his daughter because I think that is a value that's so important in life is familial protection. How did you create him?
Through a couple different ways, or a couple different ways I got there. So for me, the two big themes as I was approaching this story, one, technology, as we talked about, but the other is family. Not only because a lot of science fiction books, and trust me, I'm a huge sci-fi fan, but a lot of them are almost the lone individual, or they're almost nothing about their family. They're not really involved with their family. But again, 25 years from now, people are still going to have family, going to have kids, they're going to have loved ones. And so to me, I really wanted to see how you would operate in that world. And it was a big driving force behind the whole story of how do you protect your family and people that you love in this more technologically advanced and integrated world. But then so that for me, that was a big aspect of it. And then in terms of Dre himself, I approached him two ways. One, having that big familial bond, that is his big driving force. That is his underlying need, is protecting his family. With that, though, and to get into kind of the mechanics of the writing, is because, of course, character and story have to be intertwined. For example, Hunger Games, Katniss, she couldn't just be a wallflower. If she was, it wouldn't be the same story. She wouldn't have sacrificed herself for her sister, right? It's that has to be the part of her character that then drives the force of the plot, and then the plot forces her to. So it's right. They're tied in. So that's what So as aspiring writers, that's of course a big thing to keep in mind and to have as a central focus. Otherwise, the story doesn't always work, right?
Very
Um,
true.
so for Dre, for me, it was also a little personal because both of my grandfathers were engineers, and I admire them very much. In fact, they both. So my father's father was a structural engineer. My mother's father was a chemical engineer. After Pearl Harbor, they both tried to enlist, and they were both told that they were more valuable staying behind. And my father's father ended up helping build battleships up in New York. And my mother's father ended up helping build bombs in a factory in Texas,
Oh.
which my grandmother kept saying she kept waiting to hear a big boom one day. It was very icky, but it was right. But luckily, that didn't happen. So for me, it was kind of an homage to both of them having Dre have be an engineer and have those engineering skills. But it also worked directly with the book because I needed a character that could at least have a chance of being able to fight back against this technology, to at least have an underlying knowledge and have an ability to um, to manipulate and to offset and to know what to look for and to know what the risks are and to at least have a chance to try to fight back. And in fact, he helped build one of the main systems that were being used against everyone.
When it came to your grandfathers, was it materials that they had left behind, written materials? Were you able to question them directly and talk to them? Are they, were they still around at that point in time?
Unfortunately, not. No, my father's father died when I was 10 or 11, and my mother's father died when I was 16. But I was able to get to know my mother's father a lot before he died, and was able to pick his brain a little bit, just kid curiosity and that kind of thing. And trust me, I wish I would have had a chance to really pick their brains before writing this book. I do have a good friend who is an engineer in Chicago, and so I had him read the draft of the first book and say, is this true for an engineer? Does this resonate? Is it what an engineer, how they would approach it? And he did, he said that I pretty much hit it on the head. So it was great.
And that's wonderful. Were you able to incorporate part of their personalities? And we're going to talk about character development in a moment. But in
Mhm.
this particular instance, the personality of Dre and your grandfathers and the mentality of being an engineer, because the one thing I've found out, an engineer is not what you do. An engineer is who he is or she is or they are.
Yes.
That's it is part of the person. That
Yes.
is definitely key. So was that important in creating Dre?
Yes, at least in terms of my perception. Again, I'm working off from when I was from my memories from childhood. But I felt, especially my father's father, that family was extremely important to him. Loved my sister and I. Just we wrapped around his little finger, wrapped him around our fingers. And he just showered us with love and would spoil us and those kinds of things. And just so it was very important. And so I thought that was also really interesting as I was creating Dre, of having someone who is very methodical and very intelligent and understanding of the way the world works. In his case, in terms of structure and metal and steel and all that stuff, but also with his heart. And not to say that, engineers aren't like that. I'm just saying that it reinforced how people are multi-layered. And for me, it was an example right there. And so I wanted to try to capture that with Dre.
Which brings us to the importance of putting a book together. The assembly. So there's the initial research and there's thinking about the characters and every author, every writer has their own process. Uh, please, Michael, what is your process?
So I did a ton of research before this book because I wanted to make it as realistic and as tangible and interesting as possible. Because if I can make you as the reader just accept this world, then you're going to be pulled in deeper. it's going to become more realistic and more relatable. So I did a lot of research on near future technology and some of the things that are being that already are in existence, as well as things that are being developed. And I've taken some of those ideas. And then what I did was then I started to outline the story because, again, back to some of the technology, some of the family. And so the dynamics of the characters and the risks that they would be in. And then how would you then respond to it? And starting with the very first chapter and where the daughter Raven is in peril. And what would you do? And I try to convey in even that very first chapter, Dray as the engineer trying to look at it that, okay, this is how the police will look at it, this is what they would look for, this is what the risk is, as he's also really worried about his daughter and what the implication is with her. So I'm a planner. I have to plan out everything when it comes to writing. I tried once to just start writing something and it was horrible. No one will ever read it. It's the absolute worst. Um, but so I planned it out ahead of time. Not only because that's just how my brain works and works better, it helps me get that better balance between the character and the story. It helps me make sure that my rules for the world are consistent. And in fact, I remember I had a couple of great scenes that I would love to have had in the book, but it wouldn't work in the world that I created. And it was painful, but I cut it out. Otherwise it's not right. So that is part of the pain as a writer when you have some great idea and it just either you can't fit it in or just it goes against the rules what you've made for your world. So you have to do it. It's all for the story.
And
Um,
sometimes they are most of the beautifully written pieces that you have. And you're looking at it. And I've heard this so many times in so many writing, conferences and seminars and workshops that I've been in. And it's about not being precious about the work because it's about the story that you're
yes.
creating. I completely empathize. I understand. And it's terrible. But see, that's the decisions that have to be made. And that's the difference between, which we'll talk about later, about being a writer and being an author. And that's one of the major differences. So sorry, please continue about
No,
creating it. So you were at the part of with Dre and the relationship and what he needed to do. So in relation to the research for
mhm.
that, creating the blending of it together with the character and that. So I'll digress for a moment and ask a question about this. When you do the research, is the personality, is the character description in there, or is it just raw research and then you do separate character descriptions?
That's a good question. It's a little bit of a balance. I have a basic idea. Like I said, I wanted Dre to be an engineer, and especially in this world, and as a homage to my grandparents. But then, and I knew I wanted a daughter, an older daughter, and then a younger one. But they're originally just sketches. Like I kind of wanted these kind of roles, and then it was the technology. And as I started to build that, and started to give me ideas about the challenges they would have in this world, how they would respond, who would be involved with it, and so then the characters started to become fleshed out. Um, but I didn't. I also then at the same time there were some that I just had a little fun with. In fact, there's this one character Garley who is the scientist, and in the first book, he's almost like a walk-on. He is walks on. He's in there for 3 or 4 chapters, and then he goes away. But and I had a basic idea of kind of what I wanted for him for a character. But once I started writing him, he leapt off the page. He is just crazy, goofy personality, and to the point that some of the readers, after it was published, really liked him. And so as I was working on the second book, I'm like, wait, I can bring him back. And so I was able to spoiler. He is in the second book, and he became a greater role, and it worked out well to have him and having that type of character as well as what he did and his dynamics adding to the overall story. But to your point, if he didn't serve the story, he wouldn't have come back. But he did serve it, and I think he did fit in well.
So, Michael, you said that you do lots of research. Do you also do is it bullet points through the whole entire story so you know how the story will go, or do you write paragraphs or chapters? How do you lay out the story?
So I start out with bunch of different bullets. And back to you mentioned Apple, my iPhone, the Notes app has so many random notes, comments, quotes, things in there, and I would download that to my computer. And at first, it's just a big mess. It's an absolute mess of ideas and character notes, and I have a little part of a scene, some dialogue back and forth, and so it's this whole just homage stuff. But then that's when I start creating the story, and almost my analogy just to myself is almost like like London fog, where you just walk outside and it's all just gray. And then as you are walking through it, you start finding the path and things start to clarify and start becoming the actual story. So for me, I'm probably not the most efficient because it seems to take me, in fact, that the outline itself for the first novel took me about a year to do. And that was with some starts and stops. And the very first chapter, I had four different versions before the one that became the book that was the best and the most applicable to the story itself. Um, but then creating that, now the actual rough draft only took me about 2.5 months to write, but then it took another year of editing, which that's a whole other topic we can go into. But one thing that you had mentioned with the technology, one thing that was in a way gratifying, but in a way a little scary, is that some of the technology that I imagined started to become real. For example, in the first book, I have a scene where the main characters are attacked by this swarm of drones that moving as a like a swarm of birds or insects or whatever, but they're operating as a single unit to attack. It's actually on the cover of my book. After the book was released, there was a company in California that announced that they developed that technology.
Oh my,
In the
really?
second book, this one's even to me a little freakier. Is I came up with this idea for what I call DNA sniffers because we all shed dead skin cells and hair follicles. It's just part of what we do. And in the book, I had where the government installed these DNA sniffers that would suck through the air, and they would pull out those dead skin cells or hair follicles or dead skin cells, and they would scan and run that DNA and identify you. 2 or 3 months after The Price of Rebellion came out, a company in California announced they created that technology.
Oh my.
Yeah. Now they claim that it was, well, they can put it on mountain trails, and so hikers, if they're going past and they get lost, that could help identify that they were there. But back to your other comment about technology, okay, that's a great start, but imagine that technology being advanced and being, put out in the world. What's that going to be like in another couple of decades if you're walking past and that thing can identify you without you doing anything?
The frightening thought about that is that with the DNA technology they use in the courtroom today, and they consider it if you have DNA, it's a done deal.
Mhm.
You've done it. If your DNA is there, you were there. But to think about this is the DNA could be pulled from anywhere and planted the way they used to plant fingerprints,
Mhm.
years ago, the pulling off prints and putting the prints there, that was considered, yes, you've been there. But this takes it a step further. And what you say is very true. It's a bit frightening to think about that, of what we are. The many creative minds did it before, it was uh Michelangelo, Orwell and H.G. Wells, the imaginations that they had that are now have all come, true, to this date. So that
Mhm.
the imaginations that we have now, as you're thinking about them, will carry through to the future. What is so you've done the, the lots of research, you've done the outline,
Mhm.
you've got the ideas for the characters. I have a quick question. Do you ever like sketch out a little character sometime?
I have a vision in my mind, and I have the description, and I have a more detailed kind of background, but I don't really sketch it. I used to draw when I was back in high school, but I just haven't done that in a long time, and so they just look like stick figures. So, I don't actually physically sketch them out, but in my mind, I definitely have a clear vision of what they look like.
I this is another really kind of strange question. when you've finished with your book, as characters live in our heads, they talk to each other, they've got personalities, we live with them. You've lived with yours for a number of years,
Mhm.
and you're just finishing the third, so they're still living with you. When you've finished the third one and it's out there and you put a closure to that, how do you think you'll feel about it? Will you be, the characters will have gone their way and you're going to create a new set of characters for another trilogy or series? But how do you think you'll feel about that since they've spent so much time at home in our brains?
I think it'd be a little tough, honestly. It'd be like losing some friends. They've been with me for many years, and I think they're great. Even one of the bad guys, he's not just a pure bad guy. He's got his own moral code. Because of course, no one thinks they're a bad guy. They all think they're the heroes of their own stories, and he has his own sense of right or wrong, no matter how warped or twisted it is. All of these characters, as you said, have been with me for a number of years. So it's going to be it's a little bittersweet because almost I'm sending them off, definitely out into the world. So they're not just mine anymore. They're, readers as well, which is what I want. And as a quick aside, that's the reason why my covers, you see the characters, but they're in shadow because I want you to put your own image of the characters. I don't want to tell you or show you what I think they look like. I want to leave that to you to because that's part of that relationship between author and reader, right?
It is. I think that's a wonderful idea. I did see the covers and I actually have downloaded the first book and I'm very excited to start reading it. It's
Really cool.
Yes, I know the opportunity to read a book not for work. I'm so excited. So I have downloaded it and it is second after I finish. I've got one book I started on holiday, which I hope to finish. And very excited about reading the characters and the story. I think that as you said, when they're it's like children. And we'll get to the editing process in a moment, but I know when an author feels, they're handing it's almost an infant over to the editor, and the editor, plucks out an eye and rips off a couple toes and pulls out some. They and Writers tend to feel that personally. I think it's important that new writers understand about that process. However, I think we're going to cover one more item on this part because I know you've agreed to come for part two. And
Yes.
part two, I think, will be more about advice and what's coming in the future. So to wrap this one up, I know that you have a story that submitted Lawyers Can't Fly, and it's a finalist in the for the Columbia Pictures
Yes.
movie. So please tell us, how did you create a character for that? And how different was it writing for that rather than a novel?
So it was born of I am a superhero fan, but for me, and this was before the boys came out, that at least that I was aware of. I wanted to take a different take on superheroes, and my thought with it is, if like for example, if I was given the powers of Superman, I know I would break things. I would just I'm not the most graceful person. I would just accidentally kind of hit something and I'd break it and that kind of thing. And to have people to have these kinds of ridiculous powers, they're going to be breaking things and they're going to be, screwing up. And so they're going to be handlers. And so I thought that one of the biggest things is that, especially in this day and age of litigation and everything else, they're probably going to get sued left and right. So my thought was that, they get tired of getting sued every time they break stuff while they're trying to save the world. And so what they decided to do is they are going to recruit an attorney to become their exclusive lawyer because they want someone to protect them. So they picked this guy who is young. He's really trying to make his way in the world. He has his a moral code, but he's also just trying to kind of scrape and scrape by and everything else. But he doesn't want to become their lawyer because the superheroes are, that's like almost career suicide, because they're just so everyone's trying to sue them and no one really can handle them, so everyone's a little wary of them. And so it becomes this dynamic between this young guy who's trying to make his way in the world and become, a decent lawyer, and you've got these men and women in tights that are going after them and you can't really stop them, kind of thing. And so it's a humorous take on it, and that's why it's called Lawyers Can't Fly. Um, so then what happened was there was an opportunity to pitch. Columbia Pictures had this idea of there's going to be a lot of untapped talent out there. So they wanted to kind of give an opportunity for people who have written novels or screenplays to submit to see if they would be, if the story sounds interesting enough to pitch them. So I applied and I found out that they did this at two locations in Columbus, Ohio and Portland, Oregon. I think those are the only two. Um, and I submitted the synopsis and gave a little background and some of the characters, all that stuff. And they accepted me to come pitch it. Come to find out that I was one of only 8 that was selected to pitch this, which it's much different than writing a novel, because with a pitch, I mean, with the story, you want to tell the story, over the course of the novel. You don't want to say what happens. For a pitch, you need to tell them within the first 30 seconds, and you need to catch them in a way that a novel doesn't. I mean, you want to catch someone with a novel. With a pitch, you're trying to explain this entire, novel idea in 6 minutes. Really, the first 30 seconds, you kind of need to catch them, and then the rest is explaining and fleshing out that kind of thing. And so, never doing this before, went there and did my pitch. And I thought it went well because they laughed where I hoped they would laugh, and they went, "Oh," where I hoped that they would. And it was a huge adrenaline rush. But then about 2 weeks later, I got an email saying, "Hey, we're interested. We want to see your whole manuscript." So I said,
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
yeah. So that was great. Unfortunately, that was a little while ago, and then pandemic hit. And I've heard from others in the industry that a lot of things in development or pre-development, pre-pandemic just was all put into a drawer. So I haven't heard back. I'm assuming at this point, unless someone opens the drawer and wants to see what people have been looking at before, I don't know. They can always call at any point. So we'll see.
But there's always another opportunity as well. You never know when you might be approached for another idea, and that might spark, it's like when you drop that pebble, there's always the ripple effect, always the ripple effect. Well,
Absolutely.
I think, Michael, this is the perfect time for, and I'll say pause, because
Okay.
we're going to have part 2, which will be in, I'm not going to tell everybody because they'll just have to listen to the next episode. But I want to thank you for your time today. I think that you provide an inspiration and give hope to writers to become published authors and what's important. And the more they do to understand the process is quite important. So I always do this to everyone, and I'll do it at the end of end of part 2. Is who would you like to give a shout out to? I always like to have someone else appreciated. Who would you like your shout out to go to?
I like to shout out to my sister, Lisa, who not only is one of my biggest fans, she's also been going through some stuff personally. It's been a little difficult. But also she has been my grammar queen. She's admitted she thinks she was an English professor in a prior life. She finds things with my book that I look over it 20 times, and then she goes, "Oh, what about this?" Like, seriously? How did you see that? I never did. But she's fantastic, and like I said, one of my biggest supporters.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Well, my shout out is to those who do support writers, and in particular, editors who come back to us with providing assistance to make our stories the best they can be before we share them with anyone else. So, Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And as I say to everyone, I wish you all a sunny day, and come and listen to Michael's part 2. Thank you. you.